Alrighty, so in this video, we're going to talk about global versus local variables, but in kind of a weird way, honestly. Um, so just kind of full disclosure, global and local variables and the idea of references and like how the information is stored in Python is a little bit beyond the scope of this course. So this video is less a full tutorial on it than it is a, hey, here's what you need to know for what's going to happen as we move forward in Unit 7 in the CMU CS Academy. So just kind of fair warning there, it's not going to give you all the low-down, nitty-gritty details in Python about local versus global variables or references and all that other stuff, which is important, but in this intro course, there's definitely some information kind of being hidden from you that's working behind the scenes because you get too bogged down with all the details. So here's, without a little preamble, sorry that took way more time than it should have. Here's kind of the core idea of what we need to know for this course about local and global variables. First thing, global variables are, so by the way, we have this program over here from our Unit 6, one of our challenges and solutions, where we had this bar game. As the bar moves up and down, if I hit the space bar inside of the green zone, I get points. If I hit it outside of the green zone, I lose points. I edited it to add this little message over here just so we can talk more about local and global variables. And so now that we have all the context and the preamble out of the way, let's start talking about global versus local versus also what are called helper variables. So a global variable. So for reasons that are kind of mystical and magical and mysterious to you in this course, global variables are not good. You don't want to use them. They're not safe. They're not secure. They're kind of dangerous, and you can end up shooting yourself in the foot a lot with them. We're using them quite a bit in this course just because we're not talking about references. We're not really talking about object-oriented programming or classes in this course. So as you're learning it, there's enough to learn using these global variables. Your programs are simple enough that it doesn't really matter. But yeah, like the first thing to know about globals is when you can avoid them, try your best to avoid them. And that'll make more sense if you continue taking computer science and programming programs, courses down the years. You'll look back and think on this video from me and be like, oh yeah, okay, this is why I don't want to use global variables. Your global variables are the variables that you define outside of any other function. So in this particular program, I've defined, it looks like 4 global variables. I've defined the points variable up here, doesn't belong inside of any function, the bar variable, the bar top variable, and the winner zone variable. For more information on how this program works, go back and check out the solution video for 6.3.1. I'm just going to assume that you kind of know what's going on here. So I've defined those 4 variables. One other really important thing is that you should really, really, really try your best, A, to avoid global variables, but then B, within this course, try to make sure that your global variables are objects, that you're not just saying like my global var equals 5. That's going to cause more problems than are worth it. Your global variables should be a thing. Set it equal to a label or a line or a rectangle. That's what I want your global variables to be. Now, like you can see, setting up custom properties to store information globally inside of that global object is a thing that we'll do in this course. And yeah, just like you can do that, right? I can set a custom property for the bar variable and object and mess around with stuff there. Now, global variables, they exist globally. They are references. We're not talking about that. And they can be changed and manipulated either outside of other functions or inside of other different functions. They're global. Everybody has got access to them. Now, once we get inside of a function, you might get to a point where you're creating a local variable. So between lines 10 and 25, I am inside, and really it's line 11, right? I'll say this whole thing. This is the on-step function. So if I were to create a variable in here, it only exists inside of this function. If I move to another function or outside of it, where I'm unindented, like on line 9 or line 7, the variable that I defined inside of here does not exist. And so variables defined inside of other functions are called local variables because they're not global. They're not a world traveler, baby. They only live inside their little zone, right? It just so happens that on step, it doesn't have a parameter, so there's no local variable defined there. And I never created any kind of local variables in here. I'm only just referring to my global variables that I defined on the top. But if we look down here in onKeyPress, well, my local variables that exist in here live between lines 27 and 35. And there is actually one local variable that was created here. That happens to be any parameter, any input that a function expects. When you start running that function, that variable is created and exists locally only while that function is running, except references and stuff might change that, but we're not talking about references. But for at least this course, this key variable is an input that onKeyPress expects. When the onKeyPress function is run, it's going to create space for that variable, and that variable will only exist inside of this function between lines 27 and 35, and it'll only exist for the moments where that function is being run. If I try to go outside of the function and let's say print the key here, you can see actually I will get an error if I try hitting space and it says, yeah, look at this. If I try running it, it says key is not defined because I tried putting it outside of the local area where it lives, right? It should be between lines 27 or 35. It should be indented to show that it's inside of that function. Because this is not indented, it's outside of the function. Because key was a local variable and I'm outside of the function, it doesn't exist. If I indent it now, and now I made 36 part of the onKeyPress function, well, guess what? We're going to be okay. And if I move my thing over here, we can see that I had pressed the space key. And every time I press the space key, it will print out space. So that's a little bit about local variables. They exist inside of the functions that they're defined. You can define them by either they're automatically defined if they're input for it, or I can create one, and we'll look at that example over here in the post message function down over here. So my post message function, this is a custom function that I created. There are already two local variables that are created anytime I run this function. They are the earned point variable and the y variable. Again, these will exist only inside of this function. So in this case, that function lives between lines 37 and 43. And they work very similar to how key worked. If I tried to reference them or use them, right here, earned point I use over here on line 38. Y I use over here on line 43. If I tried to use them in a different function or outside of this function, just kind of in the big global area, it's going to give me a problem because they only exist in here. I can also, like I did on lines 39 or 41, create another local variable. CMU likes to call this a helper function. Sorry, a helper variable. And this is just a local variable that is not defined as one of the inputs or the parameters for my function. And I just create it somewhere inside of my function for use inside that function only. So what this function does is it expects, when it's called, to be given a Boolean, a true or false, as to whether or not we earned a point when I was called, and a y coordinate that you want me to post the message at. It's going to check. If earned point is true, I'm going to set a local variable message equal to the value yay. Otherwise, meaning that earned point was false, I'm going to set that local variable message to oof. And the nice thing about that is when I use this local variable, I can just create the label once and change the message based on what I had set that local variable to, yay or oof. Also, the y is dependent on the y that was passed over there. So if I run this now, run this program, when I hit the space bar, I gain a point on the top left corner if I hit space bar in the green zone, and it'll say yay at the y coordinate of that bar. If I do it outside of the winner zone, it will take away points and it'll create an oof. So that's kind of the big idea. I'm not going to talk much more about locals versus globals. We've been using them a lot already throughout this course. If you're watching this video, you're at least at Unit 7. Big idea, globals exist everywhere. You want to avoid them when you can. Please, please, please only make global variables that are storing bigger objects, rectangles, labels, lines, polygons, arcs, whatever. Not just storing a single value. Usually try to avoid that. And then global variables, the next big thing is they only exist within their local zone, either inside of their function or, like we'll see in a moment, inside of their little loops, I think. I hope that I'm not biting myself, right? I'm pretty sure if I define, yeah, it should only exist inside that loop. Yeah. Alrighty, that's the video. Locals versus globals, sorta.